What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Tonight I wanted to talk about 1962's Shoot-A-Line. Shoot-A-Line was made by Bally as a follow-up to Light-A-Line. Light-A-Line I spoke about in a recent episode. Shoot-A-Line, similarly, is a 6-card bingo with a special, separate, colored line on the backglass for each card. And this colored line will pay out in a different manner from the rest of the bingo card. But before we get into that, let's back up for a moment and talk about what a bingo pinball machine is. There are some commonalities between all of them, or I should say most of them, and even though this Shoot-A-Line is a bit of an oddball, it still has these things in common. Shoot-A-Line is a multi-coin game. That means that you drop your first coin in, the game will reset, and lift the first ball into the shooter lane. Before you plunge your first ball, you have to make a decision. Do you want to insert more money to increase your chance at winning, or do you want to play the game? Now, in some games, there are features and other things that are enabled based on the coins that you're putting in, or the buttons that you're pressing, or the actions that you're taking as a player. But in Shoot-A-Line's case, as with most 6 cards, you drop in a maximum of 6 coins, and the game will light each of the 6 bingo cards on the backglass. Now, I've talked before in a much earlier episode about ticker tape and the super line. Well, the super line is a special horizontal line which can be lit on any of the bingo cards at random and will enable 3 in a row scoring as 4 or 4 scoring as 5. Well, on Light-A-Line and Shoot-A-Line, this row, which is the second from the bottom on every card, the numbers are highlighted in yellow, and if you manage to get 3, 4, or 5 in a row in that one row, then you will earn a much higher number of replays than if you get a winner anywhere else on the card, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Now, the difference between this yellow row and your typical super line is that the super line is lit at random. However, you have a chance at the yellow row anytime you light any of the bingo cards. Alright, so I'm sure you're with me at this point, but what makes this a bit of an oddball? Well, in this case, instead of the standard 25-hole playfield that Bally both pioneered and perfected over the time from 1951 until this year, 1962, there had been no experiments, really, with the layout of the playfield. There were differences between the very first game, Light-A-Line, and Coney Island, which was the second game. And then from Coney Island, there were minor tweaks. But there had been no radical change since then. And so they decided for this game to have a radical change. And what they decided to do was, instead of a standard 25-hole playfield, let's make it an even 28. So there's 7 on each row. Well, I understand that this was not a popular game. And that is likely because players were very used to that layout. If you think about it, if you had a row of bingos, all with these different features, these amazing mechanical backglass animation or playfield animation features, and then you step up to one that has a completely different playfield, sure, you might give it a shot, but you probably don't want to relearn all of the mechanics involved with nudging the ball into the appropriate holes. You know, there's some muscle memory involved with exactly where the numbers are and how to hit them. And so I suspect that was part of the reason that this experiment was never repeated. But I don't know that for sure. I will say that from a feature standpoint, the other difference between this and Light-A-Line is that there is no center spotted number. Light-A-Line at random would spot one of the center numbers on one of the bingo cards. Well, Shoot-A-Line will not. So you have less of a chance at winning there based on the lack of spotted number or potential for a spotted number, because it wasn't guaranteed that Light-A-Line would do that. It would happen at random. But couple that with the fact that you have 3 extra holes which may attract and cause your ball to fall in, well, you've suddenly reduced your odds of winning quite a bit. And the fact is, there's no extra ball feature on this game. And I think if they had added extra balls to this game, it may have increased the play appeal a bit. Because if you had up to 8 chances, and you've increased your playfield by 3 additional holes, I think they might have had something there. Of course, the difference between this and Light-A-Line is that the payouts are actually much higher. If you look at the score and instruction cards, you'll see that for a yellow 5 in the line on card number 6, you win 1,198 replays. Now, for comparison, for a yellow 5 in a line on card number 6 on the game Light-A-Line, the sister game, you would earn only 958 replays. So, there's a pretty big difference there in the amount of replays that you win. Essentially, everything is pushed down one value from Light-A-Line scorecard. So the lowest numbers fall off, and then everything else is carried up with an extra tier at the top. So for a standard white 5 in a line, if you get a vertical inline win, or if you get a horizontal inline win that's not on the yellow row, on card number 6, you earn only 510 replays. The amount of replays you can win on this is pretty staggering for a 6-card bingo without any doubling feature. Those are coming later on. So, let's talk about artwork, and then we'll get into another playfield difference when we get to the playfield artwork. But let's start with the backglass. Now, the first thing you'll notice if you look at the backglass is the art appears to be done in a completely different style than any of the previous artwork that has been done for any Bally bingo. And I am really curious to know who the artist that they hired was, or who they were contracting through in order to get this artwork, because it does not appear to be the same well executed art that is seen in other games. Shoot-A-Line has a bowling theme, which makes it also unique in that it's the only bowling themed bingo. On the backglass you have 3 women, one of which is getting ready to run down the lane, another which is retrieving her ball, and the third is recording their scores. There is what I assume is a scorecard projector screen, which is actually the replay meter, which is pretty clever. And in the background you can see the various alleys, all in some state of disarray. Interestingly, the lettering appears as if it was drawn without any kind of template. Well, I would say that, except that it is very even. So whoever did this either freehanded the whole thing and did an excellent job, but it just looks off, or they had some kind of really odd template they were trying out. But whatever the case is, it looks amateurish. And you'll see what I mean if you look at the backglass. Well, I will also say this. Art is subjective, and I don't happen to like this particular style. And I'm certain that there are some who will disagree with me, and that's fine. I mean, everybody has their own tastes. I just don't happen to like this. And I feel that for a bowling-themed bingo, they really could have knocked it out of the park, especially with all the bowling-themed flipper games, which had come before, and then shortly after, there was a deep connection with bowling and pinball. And so I think they could have really improved that quite a bit. But that's my own opinion. The different bingo cards are very colorful. The first card is red, second is green, third is orange, fourth is baby blue, fifth is brown, and sixth is a light blue. Moving on to the cabinet artwork, we have geometric shapes. We've got a small circle on the head with two triangular arrows which are pointing towards the backglass from the back of the head. Those have a drop shadow behind them in a light blue. A curved yellow line circles down the head and through the side of the cab. And then there is a light blue, the same color as the drop shadow, behind that yellow line. On the bottom of the cab, aside from the yellow line, you have a much larger red circle, and then a red triangle with the drop shadow, as I mentioned, coming from the back. It doesn't extend all the way to the front. And inset into that red arrow is a yellow arrow. Now, I happen to like this cabinet art. Do I think that they could have implemented some kind of bowling stencil? Yes, but I also think that this particular stencil is innocuous enough that this particular machine might have been easy to place in bowling alleys and other areas where perhaps bingos were not as welcome. So let's move on to the Playfield. The Playfield is completely different from the cabinet and the backglass as far as the artwork goes. It's beautiful. You've got teams of people up at the top near the ball arch who are rolling balls down the lanes, and one of the lanes they've made a strike. Now, what's a little weird about this particular image is that the strike that they've made is directly to the right of the gutter for one of the lanes, and the pins are flying over to the left. The image itself is very striking, but I think that little oversight is kind of amusing. Now, you'll notice on the Playfield that unlike any of the other games that I've talked about, you have 28 holes, and so there's 7 on each row, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But another thing you'll notice is that there are no light towers going down the sides of the Playfield, nor are there Playfield springs surrounding the entire play area, nor are there rebound springs around the lamps. Instead, you have typical pinball plastics with rubbers around posts. And these plastics are triangular in shape, and the rubbers would add an entirely different element of play. So where I was mentioning before that this was likely not very popular at all with players, this is probably another reason. Because not only do you have to get used to a completely different layout, and it is completely different. On a standard bingo playfield, the first 7 holes are on the top row, but then the next row down only has 6 rows. And then 5, and then 4, and then 3. So you have this descending triangle. But on this, you just have a square. And so it would be very, very difficult to steer a ball where you need it to go, I think. I've never played one of these. Full disclosure here. So I think it's pretty fascinating. You know, Bally was certainly willing to experiment, and what I'd really like to know is why exactly they felt the need to experiment with this. As far as having seen one before, I've seen a picture of one. I know there was one at last year's Allentown Pinfest, and it had a dollar bill validator attached to it that would rack up 20 credits, I assume. So that's pretty neat, but I've never played one in the flesh. So that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS-1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.